Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of our Sacred Convos.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're very happy to be sharing a lot of things with you.
So this will be a space that we will be sharing more things about things that we have been trained on, things that we have studied, things that have made a difference in our lives. So you can also take and apply all these different tools into your own life. So the goal is having a more harmonic life, having more bliss, having more joy, having more health. And we will be explaining more about how all this comes together with a very specific system that we have put together. Before we start all this, for all of you that you are new to us, we would like to share a little bit of our paths. So from my side, I studied architecture, and I also I did a PhD that has to do with how location affects our health. And that's where I discovered all the relationship with the temple. So I'm very passionate about helping people having a very harmonic sacred space, how we can recreate all the temple technology in the modern buildings and the modern architecture. And there are many other things that I learned the hard way, because many years ago I had like a tough time with the personal health issues, and then I realized in the beginning that one of the core, let's say, root causes was because of the location of my bed that was on an underground fault. So for those of you that are new to that, basically when we have like a area that has what we call an anomaly, so there is underground faults, there is underground water, that can create a lot of issues over the long term. And that was a profound time for me because I went through many difficulties, and that's where I realized that if you really want to get healthy and you want to have like these optimum levels in your life, you start to need to look into more than one area of your life, and we will decode that in a little bit later. But I have a lot of passion around temples, around sacredness and sacred spaces, and how we can return this sacred energy into our daily life with daily rituals, also with herbs and supplements. I also love that. So we'll be sharing different things in general. What has been your story?
So for me, it has been many decades of self-exploration. My path has been mainly sacred geometry. Sacred geometry or fractal geometry or the mathematics of life. It has many different names, but it is just one thing. It's how the universe creates more life. And what is the cycle between life and death and rebirth. And fractal geometry and sacred geometry has been studied for many cultures, different civilizations all around the world in different time periods. And it has been the passion of my life because it unifies both the internal world and the external world. So when I was 15 years old, I had that very big question inside of me. Like, I wanted to study everything. I had a big contradiction when I was 18, 20 years old of, okay, what am I going to study? What university am I going to go? Because since I was very young, like I was 7, 8 years old, I loved to assemble and disassemble everything, like, TVs and video and everything. I wanted to know what was inside the technology, what was inside these machines. And somehow I was creating also some very basic alarms and basic things with electronic devices. And I wanted to really understand how this is actually even possible. What are the energy? What is the logic behind these things that we're creating? Because we, as humans, we created these little machines. They actually work and they produce images and sound and all these things. So I had this idea of, if I study the external world, then how can I know what is the internal world? How can I understand where my thoughts are coming from, where my emotions are coming from? Like, why do I have the emotions I have? So I have a lot of questions, like really a lot of questions And I couldn't find a simple answer, a simple solution about it. Like, there are many explanations about it. Depending who you ask is the type of answer you will find. So if you go and search for religious texts, they will tell you something about it. So the same question, depending on the context, you will have different answers. If you go to literature, to classic literature, it will tell you something. If you go to Greek literature or more modern literature, it will tell you different things. If you go to modern psychology or the origin of psychology, like, depending where you're looking for the answer is the answer you will find. But I wanted to find something more solid. I said there should be somewhere something that it's a more coherent system of knowledge, like a more unified system of knowledge. That was my main concern. Like, where can I find this? Where can I find something that can help me understand both the external world and the internal world? What it's called the objective reality, things that are surrounding us, and the internal reality, the things that are inside of us. And then, okay, externally, it's pretty easy how we can measure things, because we have scales, we have devices that we can measure, like, it's pretty easy. But then when you go inside, how can you measure your thoughts or your emotions or your energy levels or your sexuality? How can you measure a desire? It's pretty impossible unless you establish a relation with something else or with yourself. And after looking in many books, at the very beginning, I was looking in esoteric books, in religious books, because that's kind of where humanity we have placed the most sacred. But I was not reading them from a religious perspective. It was more like I have a deep quest. I wanted to find answers somewhere. And I said, okay, maybe in religious text I can find things. So I started reading the Bible, the whole Bible. And then I read the Bhagavad Gita, and I read the Quran, and I read all the sacred books. The Iliad and the Odyssey is not sacred books, but actually they have a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom.
I would say they are sacred books. I mean, it's not in the same way that you have the Quran. I get that. But it has very sacred information in there that people can apply in their lives. So. And
then I read the I Ching, and I was just devouring all the sacred texts, like direct original sacred texts. I mean, original. God knows what's original, but whatever I could find as original. And
what did you learn? Doing all this reading and accumulate, did these fall into a puzzle together for you, or how was that experience?
No, it was like opening the Pandora box. Like I was digging, and then more questions arose. Like I knew some things, and then I was reading, and it's like, okay, this is pretty interesting. But then they just led me to more questions. It's like, okay, well, so why they're saying this? And then at some point, mostly all the books contradict themselves. Like, they say, even inside the book, they say things in one part that contradicts another part of the book. So if you try to put this together, between sacred books, they say very different things. Like, some of them have a very clear perspective about life or death, and then you check the other book and it's completely different. So at some point I was like, not so satisfied. I was pretty disappointed, because I wanted to find a very clear system of knowledge that can be applied everywhere, inside, outside, that with that system of knowledge I could understand electronics, because I was very attracted to electronics. I could understand how the electrons were flowing inside the machines. And then how these electrons, or it's another type of electrons, that they were flying, they were somehow moving inside of me. So that's why I was having all these synaptic sparks in my brain that I could understand life. So I had a lot of questions, like very deep questions about it. And these books, these sacred books, helped me understand one part of it. But then I realized, like, okay, it's like these sacred books, they have like fragmented parts of the truth or reality. So it was amazing to understand them, to read them. At that time, I was reading, of course, in my level of consciousness, which if I have read them again later, I found them completely different and completely fascinating, because of course you will read any book according to your level of understanding, according to your level of consciousness. And sacred books, like the religious books, they are very dense. It's like they contain a lot of information. They have like fractal information. In every sentence you can just stay there for days or weeks just to think about how deep the thought is. And at some point I said, okay, where can I find how to decode all these books? How can I learn a mechanism or a system to read them and understand what they're trying to say? And are they all talking about the same God, or are they talking about different gods? I had like this simple question, like, this makes no sense. Like, why are they talking, some of them, about, they call God in a way, and other books call him in other ways. So it's a different God, the same God. What is all these things? I had a lot of questions. And reading all these books, I had far more questions. It was not an easy path. It was actually pretty difficult path, until I found, through my life took me to the path of yoga, and there I found, okay, there has been, Hinduism, very old civilization, that has been having similar questions, and they have a lot of books, and they have actually a lot of answers, and they have practices for thousands of years to reach this unity consciousness, to reach, at that time I didn't even know what was the name of what I was looking for. It's like I was looking for something, but I really didn't know what I was looking for.
But what you're saying is that you were looking more kind of like a system that is structured and more integrated, right? And more coherent. Mm-hmm. So you could follow that. But what you found was fragmented pieces of that system here and there.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Like sacred texts and sacred books have this system in different places, like somehow they manage to see reality, they manage to see what we call the unified field, and then they extract it. So I could find pieces of the truth in every religion, in every sacred path, in every place, but it's not like there was one single system that you could find to understand everything.
So for me, it was kind of the opposite from you. So I started my spiritual awakening around 21. And I just went deeply in a specific spiritual system that inside it, there is an integration of many different things from different paths, but it's one specific system. And because there are many ways to do this, like what Arturo, for example, is explaining, is you're putting the pieces of the puzzle together, or you choose one of these paths and you go deep. And that's like a devotional path also. But for me, it was I gained so much. I felt I evolved so much from going deep in this spiritual path. But then what happened is, I personally don't believe, maybe at that time I believed, but I don't believe that just one way can cover everything for us. And we will explain why we feel that because of this system that we created, and we will share with you. But there are things, because we have different energy bodies, and we have all these different levels, right? We are not just a body. We have a physical body. We have an emotional body. We have an intellectual body. We also have our other part, which is our roots, our vitality, our sexuality, and we also have a spiritual. So personally, what I've seen, because I also did a little pilgrimage many years ago, looking for spiritual communities and other eco-villages. And what I found, and I can share with you, is that different centers and different paths of teaching, they usually represent 1, 2 centers, maybe sometimes 3, but it's not easy to find all of these 5 levels that we will talk about today in one place. And I think that's what we have in common in what we're discussing here, which is that we were looking in a kind of integrated system that has all of that in one. And so we were looking at it in different places. So for me, after many years of being devoted to a specific spiritual path, I decided that I need answers for other pieces of the puzzle that I cannot find in this particular path, which gave me a lot of clarity and a lot of awakening around the spiritual world. But then there were other things around relationships or my own emotional traumas, or I wanted intellectually more things because I like to learn things around techniques or tools, or let's say I loved books and I wanted to learn about different sciences. So I realized that. And what we would like to share with you today is what we have put together, and we invite you to check in your life how you feel around these 5 levels, is what we call the science of life harmonics. And this is all about having all these 5 levels. So we have these 5 levels also have to do with the 5 like classical elements. They have to do with the 5 platonic solids, so geometrically. And so we have the vital level, the physical level, the emotional level, intellectual level, and spiritual level. But it's not only that. So there are like 2 things that need to come in the highest level of coherence if you want the optimum in your life, if you want a really blissful, abundant life on your mission, you know, with your own health, with your own wealth, all these things. And that is because we have like these 2 worlds. One is what we call the internal space harmonics, which is our internal world. And here we work with our own body, we work with our own emotions, we work with our own intellect. And we have the external space harmonics, which is where all the part of architecture comes. And both of us were trained, you know, architects, but we were looking for that. I got a diploma of 5 years of architecture, and I felt I didn't really learn anything, because what I was looking for is how can we create harmonic spaces? How do architectural spaces affect our different levels? How does architecture, for example, interact with our emotions? How does it react with our physical body? How does it react in the energy world or in the spiritual world? And so that's kind of the path that we both took in kind of similar, not exactly the same ways, and we were looking for all these answers. And of course, we found all these answers in different places that we will be sharing in other episodes. But it's important to understand that our architectural space, which is, you know, we have the internal space and we have everything that surrounds us, which is the external space, has also these 5 levels. So you will find again these 5 levels of interaction with our environment. And the best we can do to have like a very harmonic space in these 5 levels. So for example, the equivalent of that would be, where is your house located? What are the roots? Meaning all the earth radiation that I mentioned before. Then the physical part, what is the building made of? What are the materials? What are the paints? What are the finishes? The furniture, all that, we interact with that. We have electromagnetic fields, like this is things we need to take care of. In the emotional level, what is the design? What is the colors? What is the style? Like there are many things we interact emotionally with the space. I'm sure you have felt many times, you know, going into spaces that a space lifts you up, or you just feel like joyful, or other places that you go in and you just feel maybe depressed or stressed. Of course, then we have the intellectual level or the informational level. Then we have things like sacred geometry, and we have things that we embed as informational fields. So again, there can be things in that level, which is like more invisible, that we interact with the space. And there is an informational imprint that is more coherent or less coherent. And of course, that can impact us in different ways. And of course, there is the spiritual level, the quantic field in a way that how do we interact with that level of consciousness, of the spirit of the place, sometimes is called. And of course, you know, ancient temples had that very activated because they were meant, one of their main functions, what I saw through all my research, was to help people get to access at alter states. And that was really important for many reasons. And so, for example, there are ways to activate your mission through your space. So does your space support you in your vocation, in your bigger dream, in your vision, let's say? So all these are important, but the magic happens, and in our personal opinion and experience, that's where like the best life you can imagine can happen, is when you bring these two worlds into harmony. So the 5 levels in your internal world, you work on yourself, and then the 5 levels on your surrounding space, and you bring those two together, and it's just magic and bliss and health and everything you have imagined. What's your experience on that?
Well, for my experience, like what I was explaining before regarding the path that I took, and these questions, this excessive amount of questions that I had, the answers, I found them in fractal geometry or in sacred geometry. I found there the link of sacredness, which has to do with all the emotional, spiritual world, this unified world, and then geometry, which has to do more with the intellectual part and the mathematics and the geometry, of course, and the ratios and that more intellectual, grounded, material part of life. So for me, it was through sacred geometry, and literally this word, I listened inside my head. I listened that in Spanish, Geometría Sagrada, which at that time it was not social media. It was
nobody knew about it.
Nobody knew about it. Yeah,
that's 30 years ago.
30 years ago,
exactly.
More or less. So I listened the word Geometría Sagrada, which was like, what is Geometría Sagrada? So I went online, I checked, there was almost nothing in Spanish, almost nothing, everything in English. So I started checking in English sacred geometry, and there were some books and some teachers, not so many. But what absolutely captivated my mind was the visuals and all the animations and the images that Dan Winter, which is one of, he's a researcher, a physicist, now a very good friend of us, he had everywhere in the internet, like images and images. So I was observing these images. It's like, wow, I don't understand them, but I will study so hard that I will understand what these images are trying to explain. So at that time, I was reading a lot about sacred geometry. Everything I could find, everything was in English almost. Very few things in Spanish. And this is like really before sacred geometry and fractal geometry and all these visuals took off, because now with social media, which has pros and cons, because social media, it's like an echo chamber that can amplify really bad information, like very disintegrated information, and also can amplify amazing pieces of truth. It's just an echo chamber. And we have seen that so much, like sometimes everything, you know, a message gets viral, and then if you start digging about the message, it's not true. It's all false.
Exactly.
And now, not even that, like now even with AI, it's even like more extreme. So I found that through sacred geometry, I could find answers about how the universe is built, both internally and externally, because the same geometries, the same complex geometries rules both the internal and external world. And then from that's where I found like my magic stone. I found that, okay, this is a very solid body of knowledge, that it's very grounded. And then from there, you can derive any interpretation you want. It can be as subjective as you want. Like you have a triangle and many people say, okay, the triangle, I see the Trinity, and other people like, you can add any information you want in the geometry, but the geometry by itself may or not may have a real objective meaning. It was fascinating. It was fascinating decoding all this knowledge. From there, eventually, it derived with another teacher. I have had many teachers in my life. I have learned from really amazing teachers and masters. And one of them, it's a semiologist, and he was decoding. He put together a system of knowledge to decode internally the human being, which of course there are many traditions, there are many systems of knowledge to decode internally, but what I like about this system is that actually it linked it, and at the very, very deep, the origins that has to do with Gurdjieff, Ouspensky, etc., the origins of this knowledge comes from sacred geometry, comes from very esoteric symbols. And then eventually I start putting together all the religious symbols that they come from the same matrix of geometry. It's just that some people are looking at it from one side and other people are looking from the other side, but it's the same physical object. And that links with all what Lydia was explaining about the 5 platonic solids, the 5 levels of consciousness, the 5 elements, and these 5 basic understanding of life and how we can understand ourselves, and we can have like a measuring rod about where we are within ourselves. Like you can, of course, you can always compare yourself to someone else, but the idea of the internal development is not how you compare your levels of energy or your levels of coherence with someone else, it's how you compare it with yourself.
With yourself in the past. Like, that's the best one to check. Like, don't compare yourself to others, what he's saying. Like, compare yourself today compared to where you were 1 year ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. And then you will see how you have been improving your life or not in different areas.
Yeah. And you have, like, in the understanding of this code is that you have let's say like a computer, and the computer has the processing power, and then you have a memory disk where you will store all the information. So they were using these analogies to understand ourselves. So you have a processing power, which can be sexually, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, etc. And everybody, all of us have different processing power. Some of them very high, some of them medium, others very low. And then you have this memory disk where you will store all the information. So intellectual information, you can store it in your intellectual memory. And then this opens a big possibility of understanding that actually, okay, we have the ability to process information, which is the command centers, but also we have the memory disk, which is where we will store the information. That means that at least we have 5 memories, 5 different types of memories: sexual memory, emotional memory, intellectual memory, spiritual memory, etc. Motor memory, like our physical body can remember things. And then, of course, we are, all of us, so different. Like we have our own very particular configuration of how we store our memories in our memory disk. So the same is true for the command center, for the part of our consciousness that processes all that information, the part that is the processing power. Like in a computer, you have the chips that are, the processor that it's going to be doing all the calculations. So, but imagine you have different processing power for every level. So your sexual level has one type of processing power, and it's very different than the emotional level, than the intellectual level, etc., etc. And not only that, in this system, they realize that you not only have a different type of memory and a different type of processing power, but they all are created and they all operate in different speed. So you have different velocities, you have different speed in all of them. So that's why sometimes can be very difficult to communicate with someone if their consciousness is based on the intellectual level and you are speaking from your emotional level. They are completely other velocities, other speed.
Exactly. So listening all that, how does that make you think about these 5 levels? Like, take a piece of paper, write these 5 levels down, and begin with your internal self and see from 1 to 10, where are you in these 5 levels? And see what areas need more love, and you can consciously start doing that. So is it your emotional world? Is it your physical body? Is it your vital body, your sexuality? Is it your spiritual level? And then write the same from 1 to 10. How does your space make you feel today? Like, do you connect with your space emotionally? Do you feel like home? Do you feel cozy? Or do you feel like it's a place that you cannot connect at all and you don't feel supported? Do you feel like spiritually, like there is really an awakening when you sit in your space, or it needs far more work because it's very discoherent in some areas? So that can help you a lot to have clarity, and this is a system that you can integrate at any time in your life. For any event, you can look at it through these 5 lenses, and it can help you have a lot of clarity. So that's for today, dear friends.
Thanks so much for listening to us, and we'll be sharing with you many, many things.
We'll be back for the next episode. So keep tuned, and many blessings for today. Wishing you a beautiful day.